The void between stars was not truly empty. Xerwind of the Xerion Ascendancy knew this better than most. His command frigate, Emerald Tide, drifted through the silent expanse of the Kessari Drift, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with the slow rhythmic heartbeat of photosynthetic energy. The ship was alive in the way all Xerion vessels were, its structure grown rather than built, its veins humming with yellow-green plasma, its armor a lattice of living metal that flexed and healed like flesh. And yet, for all its organic majesty, the Emerald Tide was dwarfed by the graveyard it now surveyed. Before them stretched the wreckage of a battle fought centuries ago, twisted husks of warships, their hulls blackened by particle burns and kinetic impacts, floated in frozen silence. Some were Xerion, their once gleaming organic spires now brittle husks, their energy webs long extinguished. Others were unfamiliar, angular and brutal, their designs speaking of a species that built for war, not harmony. Arsik, the ship's chief xenologist, drifted closer to the observation blister, his emerald tendrils twitching in unease. "These are not ours," he murmured, his voice a whisper of bioluminescent static over the neural comm. Xerwind did not answer immediately. His primary eyes remained fixed on the largest wreck, a colossal, jagged thing, its prow split open like a gutted beast. The design was unmistakable, a myth, a relic, a species long since purged from the galactic records. And yet, here they were. The Xerion Ascendancy had erased them. Not out of malice, but necessity. The humans had been too volatile, too unpredictable. They had waged war with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Their weapons crude but devastating, their tactics reckless but effective. The Ascendancy had deemed them a threat to galactic equilibrium, and so they had been removed, or so Xerwind had been taught. A flicker of movement on the scanners pulled him from his thoughts. Ursik stiffened, his tendrils flaring in alarm. Commander Xerwind saw it too. At the edge of the graveyard something stirred, but not like the dead husks around them. This one was whole, sleek. Its hull was a matte black, absorbing the faint starlight rather than reflecting it. No luminescence, no organic curves, a blade cutting through the dark, and then its engines ignited. Not the soft pulsing glow of Xerion drives, not the graceful unfurling of photosynthetic sails. This was raw, violent fusion, a torch of blue-white fire that seared across the void like a declaration. The human ship turned, and it looked at them. Xerwind's blood ran cold. Ursik's voice was barely audible over the sudden thrum of the Emerald Tide's defensive systems. That's impossible. But it wasn't. Because the ship was transmitting a single pulse of data, unencrypted, broadcasting on every frequency. And when the translation protocols resolved it, Xerwind understood, with dawning horror, what it meant. It was a receipt, itemized, dated, for the destruction of an entire civilization, and at the bottom, in crisp, unyielding glyphs, paid in full. The Emerald Tide shuddered as its living hull recoiled from the human ship's proximity. Xerwind's claws flexed against the command console, the bioluminescent veins beneath his skin pulsing erratically. His crew, his people, were silent. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something sharp and metallic. Fear. The human vessel loomed before them, its angular silhouette a brutal contrast to the flowing organic curves of Xerion architecture. It did not drift. It waited. Ursik's tendrils twitched, his voice a whisper. "They're hailing us." Xerwind forced his spines to lie flat. "Open the channel." The bridge's organic comms array pulsed, its yellow-green glow flickering as it struggled to parse the human transmission. Then, not synthesized, not filtered through the melodic harmonics of Xerion speech. This was raw, unrefined, human. Xerion vessel Emerald Tide. The words were precise, clipped. "This is Colonel Catherine Emmagan of the Terran Remnant Fleet. You are ordered to stand down." Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a heartbeat. Terran Remnant, the words slithered through his mind like a toxin. The galaxy had whispered of them. Myths, ghosts, a dead species that had burned too bright and too fast. But here they were alive. Ursik's frills flared in alarm as the human ship's docking clamps extended. Not the delicate, vine-like tendrils of Xerion technology, but mechanical jaws, cold and unyielding. They locked onto the emerald tide with a shuddering clang that reverberated through the ship's living bones. "They're boarding us," Ursik breathed. Xerwind hissed, his claws unsheathing fully. "Seal the growth chambers, arm the defensive spores." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was futile. The humans had sent a receipt. A receipt, what kind of species documented annihilation like a merchant tallying wares? The airlock hissed. The first human stepped through. Xerwind had seen holos of their kind, fragile bipeds, soft-skinned, their bodies lacking natural armor, their limbs weak compared to the sinewy strength of the Xerion. But this was something else. Colonel Emmagan moved like a blade unsheathed. Her armor was a matte black exoskeleton, its edges sharp enough to cut the light. No bioluminescence, no organic warmth, just angles. Purpose. Her helmet's visor was opaque, reflecting nothing. Behind her, a squad of soldiers fanned out, their movements synchronized, their weapons humming with a low predatory charge. One of them, Sergeant Richard Anderson, according to the insignia, paused, his head tilting as he took in the emerald tide's pulsing walls, the living veins of light that threaded through the ship. "Damn," he muttered. "They really do grow their ships." Xerwind's spines bristled. This was a violation. The emerald tide was alive, sacred, a child of the great photosynthesis. And these humans walked its halls like scavengers in a tomb. Emmagan stopped before him. Even through the helmet, he could feel her gaze. "You're the commander," not a question. Xerwind forced his voice steady. "I am Xerwind of the 3rd Spore Fleet. You trespass on a vessel of the Xerion sovereignty." Emmagan's helmet tilted slightly. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, she removed it. Her face was not what he expected. Pale skin lined with scars, dark eyes that held no mercy, but no cruelty either, just calculation. "Xerwind," she said, "we're not here to fight." Ursik made a sound like a dying vine. "Then why?" Emmagan didn't look at him. Her gaze remained locked on Xerwind. "Because you owe us a debt." She reached into her belt and withdrew a data crystal, Xerion in design, its surface pulsing with faint green light. Xerwind recognized it instantly, a relic from the fall. Emmagan pressed it into his palm. The crystal activated, and the past screamed into the present. The data crystal pulsed in Xerwind's palm, its sickly green light casting jagged shadows across the chamber. The air smelled of ozone and something older, something wrong. Ursek's tendrils twitched, his bioluminescence flickering in distress. "That's quiet," Xerwind hissed. The crystal unfolded. A holographic projection bloomed between them, jagged at the edges, corrupted by time. The image stabilized, a Xerion warship, sleek and organic, its hull woven from living metal. The Vine's Embrace, a vessel lost centuries ago. The recording was grainy, but the voices were clear. Target confirmed. Human colony, ship, designation Dawn's, last light. No shields, no weapons. Xerwind's blood ran cold. The Vine's Embrace fired. A beam of emerald energy lanced out, shearing through the human vessel like a scythe through wheat. The colony ship ruptured, spilling atmosphere, bodies, and debris into the void. No return fire, no resistance. Just slaughter. The recording flickered, then shifted. A bridge feed. Xerion officers stood in their command pods, their expressions unreadable behind translucent membranes. Primary target eliminated. Secondary sweep. Affirmative. No survivors. The Vine's Embrace turned its weapons on the escape pods. One by one, they exploded into silent fireballs, ragged, desperate. This is Captain Elias Varga of the Dawn's Last Light. We are unarmed. We are civilians. If any of our people survive, if anyone hears this, tell them we didn't fight back. Not because we couldn't, because we chose not to. A pause, a shuddering breath. But if they come for you too, burn them all. The recording ended. Xerwind's grip on the crystal tightened until the edges bit into his flesh. He had studied the fall, every Xerion had. It was taught as a triumph, the culling of a dangerous species before they could spread their chaos. This was murder. Emmagan hadn't moved. Her dark eyes watched him, unblinking. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. Xerwind exhaled. No. Ursik made a strangled noise. This is forgery. The fall was justified. The humans were. Emmagan turned her head. Just slightly. Just enough. Ursik fell silent. She reached into her belt again. This time, she withdrew a small metal cylinder. Corroded, she placed it on the floor between them. The first receipt, she said. Then she turned and walked away, her armored boots ringing against the deck. The humans followed. Xerwind stared at the bullet. Ursik finally found his voice. We should destroy them now, before they. Xerwind didn't answer. He was still seeing the escape pod's burned section fey. A pattern of mercy. The silence in the Xerion command chamber was thick enough to choke on Xerwind's. Secondary heart thrummed in erratic pulses, his bioluminescent veins flickering with stress. The bullet lay between them. Small, rusted, insignificant. Yet it weighed more than a warship. Ursik's tendrils twitched in agitation, his emerald skin dulled with unease. This is a deception, he hissed, though his voice lacked conviction. The fall was sanctioned. The humans were what? Xerwind interrupted, his voice hollow. Ursik hesitated. Xerwind didn't need an answer. He had seen the records, the real ones, not the sanitized histories fed to the masses. The humans had not been the rabid beasts the Galactic Accord had painted them to be. They had been loud, yes, chaotic, unpredictable, but they had also been builders, and they had been burned alive in their escape pods. The human commander, Emmagan, had not spoken another word. She had simply left the bullet behind, a relic of a war fought in shadows, and walked away. That silence was worse than any accusation. Ursik's claws flexed. We must act, if they have returned. Then they are already beyond our reach, Xerwind said. The realization settled over him like a shroud. The humans had not come screaming out of the void with fire and retribution. They had walked onto his ship. They had stood before him, unarmed, and shown him the truth. That was not the act of conquerors. That was the act of judges. The human vessel loomed in the viewport, sleek and predatory, its hull a matte black that drank in the light. No energy signatures pulsed from its surface. No weapon ports glowed with charging sequences. It was silent, waiting. Xerwind's tactical display flickered as the ship's system struggled to parse its design. The vessel was wrong. It didn't conform to known shipbuilding principles. No smooth curves of Xerion biotech, no angular precision of the Accord's warships. It was something else, something older. Ursik's voice was tight. They are transmitting. A single message scrolled across the screen. We do not forget. We do not forgive, but we are not here for vengeance. Xerwind exhaled. That was the true horror of it. The humans could have come in fire. They could have reduced his fleet to molten slag before he even knew they were there. Instead, they had come with receipts, and that meant they were not here to destroy. They were here to prove. Sergeant Richard Anderson watched the alien commander through the feed, his fingers resting lightly on the trigger of a rifle he had no intention of firing. Colonel Emmagan stood beside him, her arms crossed. They're scared. Anderson snorted. Good. Emmagan didn't respond. Anderson knew why. This wasn't about fear. It wasn't even about justice. Not really. It was about truth. The galaxy had buried humanity beneath lies. Now the dead had returned to dig themselves back out, and they were doing it without firing a single shot. Anderson smirked. Now that was a human victory. Xerwind's bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically beneath his emerald skin, the rhythmic glow betraying the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. The command chamber of his flagship, verdant resolve, hummed with the quiet tension of a predator caught in its own snare. The organic walls pulsed with the ship's photosynthetic energy, casting shifting patterns of yellow-green light across the smooth vine, like consoles. The air smelled faintly of ozone and chlorophyll, familiar, comforting scents that now did nothing to steady him. He had expected battle. He had expected annihilation. He had not expected this. The human fleet hung in the void before him, their vessels sleek and silent, their hulls dark as the abyss between stars. No weapons charged, no shields flared. They simply existed, an immovable truth in the face of all his assumptions. Ursek, his chief scientist, stood beside him, her frilled cranial ridges twitching in distress. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the ambient thrum of the ship's living machinery. They should not be here. Xerwind did not respond. He didn't need to. The humans should have been extinct. The records said so. The archives, the histories, the carefully curated data, streams of the galactic accord, all of it agreed. Humanity had been a myth, a cautionary tale of a species too reckless, too violent, too human to survive. Here they were, not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as judges. The realization settled into Xerwind's bones like a slow-acting toxin. The humans had not come with fire. They had not come with vengeance. They had come with proof, cold, irrefutable, meticulously preserved. And that was worse, because if they were telling the truth, if the galaxy had indeed erased them, buried them beneath lies and silence, then everything Xerwind knew was a lie. His people, his history, his purpose. Ursek's claws flexed against the console, her bioluminescence flickering in agitation. What do they want? Xerwind exhaled, the sound heavy with the weight of an answer he already knew. They wanted the galaxy to remember, and that was the true horror. Because if the humans were right, then the Xerion were not the inheritors of wisdom. They were the inheritors of theft, and the dead had returned to collect their debt. The silence on the Xerion command deck was thick enough to suffocate. Xerwind's tendrils twitched involuntarily, their usual rhythmic pulse of bioluminescence, now erratic, betraying the storm beneath his composed exterior. The human warships hung in the void before him, their matte black hulls drinking in the light of distant stars, their silhouettes jagged like the teeth of some ancient predator. They did not move, they did not speak. They simply waited, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Ursek's claws scraped against the organic metal of her console, the sound like dry leaves rustling in a dead wind. Her secondary eyes, normally a steady emerald glow, flickered with uncertainty. She had spent cycles studying the remnants of the so-called myth species, piecing together fragments of their history from half-erased data caches and forbidden archives. She had thought herself prepared. She had been wrong. The humans had not come with the fury of a dying race. They had not come screaming for blood. They had come with records, cold, precise, relentless records. Xerwind's mind reeled as the data streamed across the bioluminescent display before him. Ship manifests, colony logs, last transmissions, every entry meticulously preserved, every name etched into the void with the permanence of a tombstone. This is Captain Elias Varga of the Terran vessel Dawn's resolve. We are under attack by unidentified forces. Our shields are failing. Our engines are gone. They are. The transmission cut off. The next entry auto played. Colony Alpha. 9 to any allied vessels. We are being boarded. They are killing everyone. They are. This is the last broadcast of the soul's remembrance. We are the last. Tell them we. Xerwind's blood ran cold. This was not war. This was erasure. and the humans had kept receipts. Ursic's voice was barely a whisper, her bioluminescence dimming as if the weight of realization had physically drained her. They were not myths. Xerwind did not answer. He could not, because the truth was worse than myth. The humans had not vanished. They had been taken, and now they had returned, not with vengeance, but with accounting. The display flickered one final time, resolving into a single image, a human woman in a black uniform, her gaze as unyielding as the void itself. Colonel Catherine Emmagan. Her insignia bore no rank, no allegiance, only a single symbol, a broken circle reforged. Her voice was calm, measured, deadly. "You will hear them." And then the transmission ended. The silence that followed was worse than any scream, because Xerwind understood now this was not a battle. It was an audit, and the galaxy had failed. The silence in the Xerion command nexus was thick enough to choke on. Xerwind's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, his bioluminescent veins flickering between emerald and sickly amber as his mind raced. The holographic display before him had gone dark, but the image of the human commander, Colonel Emmagan, burned behind his eyelids. That unbroken stare, that weight. She had not spoken in anger. That was what terrified him most. Anger was fire. Anger was heat. Anger could be extinguished, redirected, bargained with. But the humans had not come in anger. They had come in certainty. Ursic's fronds trembled as she interfaced with the organic data streams, her photosynthetic nodes dimming under the strain of processing what they had just witnessed. The records the humans had transmitted were not mere battle logs. They were ledgers, every ship lost, every colony burned, every life taken, and the dates. Xerwind's secondary heart stuttered. The oldest entries stretched back centuries. Ursic's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the bio. Mechanical systems, they kept records all this time. Xerwind did not answer. He could not, because the realization was settling into his bones like ice. The humans had not forgotten. They had not allowed themselves to forget. The display flickered again, this time resolving into a new image. An ancient star chart, its edges frayed with digital decay. A single system pulsed red at its center. The human homeworld. Ursic's fronds stiffened. That's impossible. Xerwind knew why. The records in the galactic archives listed Sol as a dead system. A graveyard, a cautionary tale of a species that had torn itself apart in nuclear fire before the first Xerion exploratory vines had even breached the void. But the humans had just shown them the truth. Sol had not died. It had been murdered. And the humans had not just survived. They had remembered. The display shifted again, this time showing a fleet. Not the sleek predatory warships that had emerged from the void, but something older. Rougher, a patchwork of scavenged hulls and jury-rigged systems held together by desperation and sheer stubborn will. The Exodus fleet. Ursic's voice was hollow. They ran. Xerwind's neural tendrils coiled tight. They had not run, they had retreated, and now they had returned. Not as refugees, not as survivors, but as judges. The display flickered one final time, resolving into a single line of text, stark against the void black background. You will hear them. And then silence. The kind of silence that came before a storm. Xerwind exhaled, his bioluminescence dimming to a dull, fearful green. The galaxy had thought humanity extinct, a cautionary tale. But myths did not keep receipts, and humanity had just presented the bill. The silence in the Xerion command nexus was thick enough to choke on. Xerwind's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, their usual rhythmic glow now a stuttering, sickly green. The weight of the revelation pressed against his exoskeleton, like the gravity of a dying star. He had spent cycles dismissing the whispers of the Terrans as nothing more than spacer superstition, ghost stories told in the dark to frighten hatchlings. But now, the ghosts had returned, and they were angry. Across the chamber, Ersic stood frozen. his bioluminescent markings flickering in distress. The scientist's normally precise movements were gone, replaced by the rigid stillness of prey caught in a predator's gaze. His secondary eyes, usually reserved for deep analytical focus, were fully dilated, absorbing the horror before him. The display still held that final damning line, "You will hear them." And then nothing. No demands, no threats, just the quiet, unshakable certainty of a reckoning deferred. Xerwind forced himself to move, his talons clicking against the organic plating of the command deck. His mind raced, sifting through the implications. The humans had not merely survived, they had waited. They had let the galaxy forget them. Let empires rise and fall in ignorance. Let the Xerion dominion expand its reach unchecked. The answer came like a blade between the ribs. Because they wanted witnesses, a shudder ran through the chamber as the holographic display flickered back to life. This time, it was not a recording. This time, it was live. A human face filled the screen. Colonel Catherine Emmagan. Her features were sharp, weathered by decades. No centuries of war. Her eyes were the color of old steel, unyielding, and her mouth was set in a line that promised no quarter. She wore no ceremonial garb, no insignia of rank beyond a simple black uniform, its fabric woven with the faint shimmer of adaptive nanoweave. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "Commander Xerwind." It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, the way one might speak the name of a condemned man before the execution. Xerwind's neural tendrils coiled tight. He had faced down rebellions, crushed entire systems beneath the Dominion's might. But this was different. This was not a battle. This was judgment. "You have seen the records," Emmagan continued. "You know what was done." Ursek made a sound, something between a whimper and a prayer. Xerwind forced his voice steady. "The Dominion was not responsible for the Exodus." Emmagan's expression did not change. "No, but you inherited its legacy. You built your empire on the bones of ours." The truth of it was undeniable. The Xerion Dominion had risen in the wake of humanity's supposed extinction, absorbing the territories they had once called home, repurposing their ruins, erasing their history. And now the architects of that erasure stood exposed. Emmagan leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not hatred, but something far colder, disappointment. "You had a choice," she said. "You could have remembered. You could have honored the dead. Instead, you buried them beneath your ambition." Xerwind's bioluminescence dimmed further. He had no rebuttal, no defense. The silence stretched. Then Emmagan exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing a breath she had held for centuries. "But we are not here for vengeance." Xerwind's head snapped up. "We are here for justice," she continued. "And justice requires a bargain." Ursek's tendrils twitched. What do you want?" Emmagan's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time something like pity crossed her face. "Recognition," she said simply. "You will tell the galaxy what happened. You will unerase us. You will speak our names." Xerwind's throat tightened. It was not a demand for territory, not a call for tribute, just memory. And yet, he knew, this was the most dangerous request of all, because the galaxy had feared humanity's weapons. But it had never feared their story. Not until now. Emmagan leaned back. "You have one cycle to decide." The transmission cut. The chamber plunged into silence once more. Xerwind stared at the empty space where her face had been. The humans had not come for war. They had come for truth, and truth, once spoken, could never be unspoken. Ursek's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" Xerwind closed his primary eyes. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. The silence in the command chamber was thick, suffocating, like the air before a storm. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flickered, adjusting to the dim glow of the bioluminescent consoles around him. The hum of the Xerion's living ship, usually a comforting pulse of energy beneath his feet, now felt like the slow, rhythmic breathing of something waiting to strike. He turned his gaze to the observation pane. The human fleet hung in the void, their ships sleek and angular, their hulls dark as the space between stars. No organic curves, no pulsing veins of photosynthetic energy, just cold, unyielding metal. And yet, there was something alive about them, not in the way of Xerion technology, which grew and adapted, but in the way of a predator coiled to spring. Arsec shifted beside him, his bioluminescent markings flickering with unease. "They could have destroyed us already," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the ship. "Why give us time?" Xerwind knew the answer before he spoke it. "Because destruction is easy," he said. "What they want is harder. Recognition. A reckoning." The Xerion Dominion had prided itself on its meticulous archives, its living databases woven into the very roots of their great biocities. Every civilization they had encountered, every species they had catalogued, each had its place in the grand tapestry of the galaxy, except one, a footnote. If that, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of scholars. They were reckless, the histories said. They burned too bright too fast, and so, they burned out. But they hadn't. And now, they stood at the threshold of Xerion space, not with weapons raised, but with a demand so simple it was terrifying. "Speak our names." Xerwind's mandibles twitched. He had commanded fleets, negotiated with empires, made decisions that shaped the fate of star systems. But this was different. This was not about power. It was about memory. And memory, once awakened, could not be put back to sleep. Arsec exhaled sharply, his tendrils curling inward. "If we comply, the Dominion will see it as weakness." Xerwind knew that too. The High Synod would never allow the records to be amended. To admit that humanity had been erased, not by time, but by choice, would unravel centuries of carefully constructed history. He thought of Emmagan's eyes, the quiet fury in them, not the rage of a conqueror, but the cold, patient anger of a survivor. "They are not asking for vengeance," Xerwind said slowly. "They are asking for justice." Arsec's bioluminescence dimmed. "Justice is a luxury we cannot afford." Xerwind turned back to the void. The human fleet waited, and in that silence, he understood the true weight of their demand. It was not just about the past, it was about the future, because if the galaxy remembered humanity, truly remembered them, then it would have to face what had been done. And worse, it would have to ask itself, who else have we erased? The question settled in his thorax like a stone. He had one cycle to decide, and for the first time in his life, Xerwind, High Commander of the Xerion 7th Fleet, was afraid, not of war, but of the truth. And what came after? Xerwind stood in the observation blister of his flagship, emerald tide, his chitinous fingers pressed against the organic glass. The human fleet hung in the void like a constellation of knives, silent, patient, and utterly still. Their ships were not like Xerion vessels, grown from photosynthetic alloys and pulsing with verdant energy. These were forged things, angular and brutal, their hulls scarred from battles older than Xerion civilization itself. He had studied their designs in the archives. The records had called them primitive. They were anything but. The humans had not simply survived their supposed extinction, they had evolved. Their technology was a paradox, at once ancient and terrifyingly advanced. Their fusion drives burned with the same relentless efficiency as their will. Their weapons were not tools of war, but instruments of precision annihilation, and their armor, Xerwind's mandibles twitched. Their armor absorbed energy, not deflected, not dispersed, consumed. Arsec had theorized it was some form of quantum reactive plating, a technology the Xerion had abandoned cycles ago for being too unstable. Yet here it was, perfected by a species the galaxy had written off as dead. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. Arsec entered, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with unease. The Council demands an answer. Xerwind did not turn. They fear the humans. They fear what the humans represent. And there it was. The unspoken truth. The humans were not just a fleet. They were a reckoning. For centuries, the galaxy had pruned its history, excising inconvenient truths like diseased vines. The Krothax uprising, the Velnari purge, the human extinction, all neatly erased, all justified as necessary. But the humans had not died. They had remembered, and now they stood in the void, not with demands of conquest, but with a single, devastating request. Tell the truth. Xerwind exhaled, his respiratory vents hissing. What if we refuse? Ursic's frills stiffened. You saw their weapons, their armor, their willingness. Yes, that was the most terrifying thing of all. The humans were not here to destroy. They were here to prove a point. And if the galaxy refused to listen, they would demonstrate with brutal, undeniable clarity exactly why that was a mistake. Xerwind's gaze drifted to the tactical display. The human flagship, Pale Horse, loomed at the center of their formation. Its commander, Colonel Catherine Emmagan, had not issued a single threat. She hadn't needed to. Her silence was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Xerwind closed his eyes. He had spent his life obeying orders, upholding the peace, preserving the balance. This was not balance. This was a lie. And the humans, with their scarred ships and their quiet fury, were forcing him to choose the lie he had served or the truth he had ignored. His decision settled in his thorax like a dying star. Prepare a transmission. Ursic went very still. Xerwind. Not to the Council. Xerwind turned, his bioluminescence flaring with resolve, to the humans. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy would hear a Xerion commander speak words it had tried to erase. We remember. The void between the fleets hummed with tension, a silent battlefield where energy signatures flickered like dying embers. Xerwind's transmission pulsed through the darkness, a single burst of data wrapped in the old encryption protocols, ones the humans had taught them. Long ago, on the bridge of the Pale Horse, Colonel Catherine Emmagan stood motionless before the holodisplay, her face unreadable. The message played, its contents brief, its weight immeasurable. We remember, for a moment, the only sound was the steady thrum of the ship's fusion core. Then slowly, the colonel exhaled. Signal the fleet, she said, her voice low. Stand down weapons, hold position. Sergeant Anderson, standing at tactical, hesitated. Ma'am, she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied the Xerion flagship, its organic hull pulsing with faint yellow-green bioluminescence. Its vine, like weapon arrays retracting in a gesture of surrender or solidarity. The sight was surreal. The Xerion had been the architects of the silence, the enforcers of the lie, and yet, their commander had just shattered it with 3 words. We remember. The past was a ghost that refused to stay buried. Aboard the Xerion vessel, Xerwind waited, his bioluminescent patterns dimmed in uncertainty. He had expected retaliation, annihilation, some final brutal punctuation to centuries of deception. Instead, the human fleet had gone still, their weapons dark, their ships hovering like sentinels. Ursic's voice was barely audible. They're not firing. Xerwind's mandibles tightened. No, he had gambled everything on the hope that the humans still understood mercy, that they still recognized the difference between an enemy and a prisoner of the same lie. And now, the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. On the Pale Horse, Emmagan turned to her comms officer. Open a direct channel. The bridge crew tensed. This was the moment, the first true communication between their species in centuries. Not a declaration of war, not a demand for surrender, a conversation. The holodisplay flickered, resolving into the image of Xerwind, his emerald carapace streaked with the faint scars of command, his eyes reflecting the same exhaustion she felt in her bones. For a long moment, neither spoke, then Emmagan inclined her head, just slightly. You kept the old codes. Xerwind's bioluminescence flickered in acknowledgement. Some things should not be forgotten. She studied him, searching for deception, for the trap she had spent her whole life expecting. But all she saw was the same weariness that haunted her own reflection. The galaxy had lied to them both. And now, against all odds, they were standing in the ashes of that lie, staring at each other across the void. Emmagan exhaled. Then let's talk. The torch had been lit. Now, the fire would spread. The silence between them stretched like the void itself, heavy, infinite, charged with the weight of centuries. Xerwind's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in slow, deliberate waves. The yellow-green glow of his organic command throne, casting shifting shadows across the bridge. His ship, the Emerald Tide, was a masterpiece of Xerion engineering, living architecture, its walls breathing with photosynthetic energy, its veins humming with the same power that had once fueled the war machines that hunted humanity to near extinction. And yet, here they were, not as hunter and prey, not as conqueror and conquered, but as survivors. Emmagan's fingers flexed against the armrest of her own command chair, the cold metal biting into her skin. She had spent her life expecting this moment to end in fire, in the scream of railgun salvos and the blinding flash of antimatter warheads. Instead, the only sound was the quiet hum of the Dauntless's reactors, the faint whisper of air cycling through the vents. Ursek, the Xerion scientist, shifted at Xerwind's side, his emerald carapace flickering with nervous energy. His eyes, too large, too dark, darted between the human commander and the holographic feed displaying the wreckage of the false history they had both been fed. "The records," he finally said, his voice a whisper of biosynthetic resonance. They were altered. Emmagan didn't need to ask which records. She already knew. The galaxy had been told that humanity died screaming, that their last fleets burned in the void, that their homeworld was glassed into oblivion. A cautionary tale, a warning of what happened to those who defied the consensus. But the truth was in the wreckage drifting between their ships. The truth was in the blackened husks of ancient human vessels, their hulls still bearing the scars of weapons no Xerion ship had ever carried. The truth was in the data streaming across her screens, now lines of code and battle logs that told a story the galaxy had tried to erase. Humanity hadn't been wiped out. They had been betrayed, and they had survived. Xerwind's voice cut through the silence, low and rough. "You were never the monsters they claimed." Emmagan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. "No," she agreed. "But neither were you." The realization settled over them like a collapsing star. The war had never been about survival. It had been about control. And now, standing in the ruins of that lie, they had a choice. Xerwind exhaled, his bioluminescence dimming slightly. "What now?" Emmagan didn't hesitate now. She said, her voice steel wrapped in fire. "We show them the receipt." And as the Dauntless's fusion torch ignited, lighting the void with the blue-white fury of human defiance, the galaxy would finally learn the cost of its mistake. Section Fae. Reckoning, the Dauntless tore through the void, its fusion drive carving a scar of ionized plasma across the black. Behind it, the Xerion warship Verdant matched its trajectory, their hulls close enough that their energy signatures bled together. Yellow-green and blue. White, intertwined like the roots of two ancient trees forced to grow. As one, Emmagan watched the tactical display with narrowed eyes. The galaxy's comm channels were already erupting. Panic, disbelief, frantic orders from the High Synod demanding explanations. The Xerion's betrayal of their own kind had been buried deep, but now the truth was a virus, spreading faster than any containment protocol could suppress. And the humans, her humans, were the vector. Xerwind stood beside her, his bioluminescent veins flickering with tension. They will try to silence us, he said, his voice a low hum. The Synod does not tolerate dissent. Emmagan's fingers danced across the console, pulling up star charts, old battle logs, encrypted files, stamped with the sigil of the long-dead Terran Accord. They can try, she said, but they forgot one thing. A pulse of energy flared on the scanners. 3 more Xerion vessels had just translated into the system. Warships, their hulls bristling with photosynthetic cannons, their formations tight with lethal intent. Emmagan didn't flinch. She tapped a command. The Dauntless's comm array activated, broadcasting on every frequency, encrypted and open, flooding the void with data packets records of the First Contact massacre, the Xerion sabotage, the decades of lies, and beneath it all, a single message, repeating in every known language, "We remember." Xerwind's spines flexed. They will come for us with everything they have. Emmagan leaned back in her chair, her smile sharp as a blade. The first volley of plasma streaked toward them. The Dauntless rolled. Its point, defense lasers slicing the attack apart before it could connect. A new signal, not from the Synod, not from the warships, from the dark. 100 new contacts blinked into existence on the edge of the system, their transponders old, their signatures fragmented, but unmistakable. Xerwind's breath caught. "You said your people were gone." Emmagan's laugh was wildfire. The galaxy had tried to erase them, but humanity had never been good at staying dead. And now, as the first salvos of the Second Terran War lit the void, the Xerion Synod would learn the cost of their mistake, the cost of hope.